Alrighty, let's see. There we go. So, I went into the studio today, unloaded a kiln, got some stuff prepped for tomorrow because I'm going to be giving away some of my cups to some of my students, so that's going to be kind of exciting. And then I'm thinking, how about I do something a little bit different this time? I used to do some videos where I'd like talk over like what I was doing, like, and what I'm thinking about. And so I think for today's videos on the three I make, I'm gonna do something just simple, and I'm gonna just talk over what I'm doing, and hopefully I've gained some more like comfort with talking in front of this camera, so maybe I can get a better stream of like what's happening in my brain to my hands to and like matching it with my words. So I already struggle with that as is, so we'll see how I do today. So I'm gonna cut to that. I'll see you guys in a second. Peace. Alrighty. So I'm just gonna do these all one at a time here. And this is the first chunk, right? I take a 25-pound bag of clay and I cut it into 6 separate little chunks, So how much clay I usually work with, right? I try to get six of these sort of tree forms out of one bag. And it's usually pretty good. Sometimes obviously I'll mess up the tree form and I have to like wedge up a new chunk of like some of the failure. And so that's what this is. This one particularly is like from like 2 days ago, and I just had to re-wedge it. And I haven't been doing this as much recently, but I'm just getting a little cone on the bottom so that I don't get any air pockets. And I'm like taking my palm and almost like splaying it out, just trying to get as much of that clay compressed and stuck to this base as possible. If you ever notice sometimes when you go to make this first initial thing, it just gets like launched off, just try to put some more pressure downward, and sometimes I can just help it stick a little bit nicer. It's that first pull, it's always just, this hand's not really doing too much. So all my left hand here is like taking that clay up and just getting it straight up that cone, right, to get sort of like a pillar, right? And then the cool thing with clay is clay will move wherever your hands aren't. So if I'm pushing it, if I'm tilting it this way a little bit, there's nothing under there, right? And so it will move really easily. And so that will help you, like, if you feel like you're really battling the clay and you're using a lot of your arm strength, try to position the clay in a way where there's no clay or your hands that are underneath of it. And you'll notice that if you put pressure from the top, you'll want to go straight down to wherever there's no clay. And so I already have it pretty centered, right? And I wasn't doing too much, too crazy of a move. And again, it's just that left hand up. It's like that swooping motion. And this right hand's really not doing anything. And then when I'm coning it down, you can cone with one hand. Just make sure you're really keeping that top thumb, your chicken wing, that's what I call it, down, right? And I'm thinking about the clay's, like I'm trying to feel if I'm gonna run into anything. I think there's an air bubble in here. I could feel it as I was coning the clay up. So I know that's gonna be potential, like I might lose it later on, right? I'm just gonna make sure I get it as centered as possible here. And you wanna, I really don't like the thinking about it this way, but imagine like you stretch before you run, right? So you wanna stretch before you clay, right? And instead of your body, you're stretching the clay is your body, right? You're stretching it so it's like warmed up to being moved. Sometimes if you don't, you'll realize that like the clay is like really not wanting to move with you. It's really battling against you. Just cone it up and down a couple times, and then you'll find out like, oh, clay really wants to glide if you sort of warm it up a little bit. Alright, I got my bottom sort of flat, and when I'm doing the bottom, that first initial pull, I'm slicing through it. I'm trying to get all the way sliced through there. And then here we are with the first pole. It's a claw grip pole. And that's all that my left hand is doing, is sort of taking it to be this conal shape again, while my right hand sort of squeezing in an S-curve format. And what I've been thinking about recently too, is this is where I would normally do like my normal poles, but I've realized that there's a lot of clay that's still stuck in this chunk here. So I'm going to do like I think it's like an English pole, but I'm just pushing it into my hand ever so slightly here to get some of this stuff out the bottom, just to start it off that pole, so I have a little bit more room to do traditional, just normal pole here. I'm keeping my walls thick on these first poles, and that's all I'm doing, is trying to equalize that clay, because if you can get it pretty equal throughout the body, it's just going to start gliding later on, and that's when the clay feels that, it's like the butter moments, you know. Again, I'm going to take this clay down. Great. Go right up over top of it. I can feel it getting a little bit thin on the top. Wet that down. Collar that in. Look at that. Great. I'm going to do that same exact thing. Go to the bottom. And I'm just looking for this S-curve. I'm checking the thinness. I'm a little bit thin on the bottom, so I'm going to be slow. Nice and slow. My pinky is also riding along that other side, keeping it in place. I mean, look at that. I mean, that's a cylinder if I've ever seen it, right? I'm going to collar it in one more time, and I'm also going to try to keep this top rim thick, right? If you can keep like that top rim just a little bit thicker, it'll be able to hold a lot of this other clay in place. I know it sounds kind of weird, but if it was thin, you know, it's not really keeping it on center, where as if it was like really nice and thick, you know, you're in a good spot to like recenter it if it gets off center. Again, I'm going to do one more. Okay, keeping that still thick on the top, and so as I'm getting taller there, right, I'm just letting up the pressure, right? I don't want to keep too much pressure on that top edge, or else I'll start torquing this bottom here, and it'll twist and it will look sort of unsightly. But the forms are making it, I have some leeway, so I don't really fuss over it too much. Alright, then I'm going to find my pattern, my rhythm, so boom, 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 boom. Then whatever you do once, to exaggerate it, you just do it again, right? So I'm just going to take these all the way up. I get about here. And once I'm about here, I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to just try to make a nice spot right on this edge here, you see? So I can start my tree pole outward from that point. Get some water on the top here. Twisting it a little bit. So now it's really twisted. So it's probably going to fall. It's okay. We're going to set it into place here. And so I think I got to stop there. But I kind of have this cool wispiness to it, right? And if you could see from top, it's almost like it's like a flower coming out from this way and then forward. Right, let's get a side angle. Like from here and then out, it like would fall in line perfectly with how the form is going, right? And you can see the form is really stressed because there's so many little stress fissures happening here. It might even fall from this top point here. Watch, it's coming out right now. Let's see what happens. See? There we go. So now we have something, I don't even know. Like, these shapes initially I would be like, oh, it's terrible, but you gotta remember, these things are never functional, right? It's like they're not really gonna be used for anything other than maybe putting a ceramic flower in it, right? So now I have to think about, well, is the form cool? And sometimes it is. Like this one, I think that this half circle, you never really get to see the circle, I guess, from the wheel, unless you're looking at it from above, right? So it's kind of cool that like these forms, you can kind of see like aspects of a pot that you'd only see from certain angles. So I get kind of excited whenever this sort of stuff happens. Let's see, is it going to be falling here? Yeah, it's going to want to fall. So I'm just going to dry my hands and I'm going to reset it. And then when I'm resetting it, that's all I'm doing is, you can see I'm just shaking it, and it's going to want to go down and fall into these twists, and then eventually these little edges will set on one of another and sort of hold it in place and keep it nice and stiff. Alright, I'm going to put some water on this bottom here. I just want to make sure I got enough. Great. And then I have enough here where I'm going to do some pretty nice twists. So now I got this top part. Clean off your wire. When stuff gets on it, sometimes it will catch. So here I am with my wire, and when I'm cutting, I'm going to cut across. I know you guys can't see, but I'm cutting as in a straight line across, not like towards the pot, right? Imagine like, instead of cutting, if this is a circle, right? Instead of cutting towards the circle, right? I'm cutting across the circle, right? At the edge, and then that's what's causing these things to be pretty even, and it also allows for me to, you know, twist them up a little bit nicer because they become a little bit longer as well when I'm going across rather than in towards the form. I'm just picking them up and twisting them over my finger here. Nothing too crazy, right? And then that's all I'm going to do with my other, once I finish, is fold this edge in. Sometimes I fold them, sometimes I don't. I think a majority I fold them. I think it just adds this other level of like looseness. They almost get really wispy, and so I like that. And so now I'm just going to take my tool, carve out that bottom there, and that's one of them, right? Like, I mean, look, you can see the whole underside of what those twists sort of look like, and it's like the pot is just looking at you. So this is that pot there. I'm going to skip to the next one. I'll see you guys in a second. Peace. Alright, we got the second one here. I'm going to get this on. Sometimes there's a little dry ring from, you know, I've realized that I can make the bottoms on these pots as thin as I want them to be, as long as, right, I let them dry instead of wiring them off. And so I've realized that it's dry enough down here that it only takes like 2 days for the pots to dry and just come off naturally from the plastic bats. Probably be even faster if I used a different type of bat, like a wooden one that absorbs the moisture. And so, but I realized that, so I just make them super thin on the bottoms. Sometimes they break through if I use a wire, but ever since I stopped using the wire and I just let them come off naturally, I stopped having that problem, right? And again, like, I just don't want to trim them, so I'm trying to get it as thin as possible on the bottom there, so that I'm not, you know, stressing out over them being like abnormally like way too heavy, right? Sometimes, you know, it's so weird, even though I'm using roughly around the same amount of clay, sometimes they feel really light and sometimes they feel really heavy, right? And so it's kind of fun getting to pick up a bunch of the same, like actually the same weight, but just the way that I've displaced the weight in the pot there changes how the implied weight. That's a good way to say it. The implied weight. And this clay it's pretty short too. On some other clay, I can really like whip that top around and it doesn't like rip. But you can really tell if a clay is really short or if it's really plastic. You know, like stretchy or not stretchy, essentially. By if it starts to break, like right in these areas, as you're like twisting it there. And then you'll trap air in there, sadly, and you'll feel that spot, but you can sort of massage them out. And what I'm doing with this top palm of my hand is pushing that clay down on the edge, and you can see it naturally wants to rise up, right? And so that's like something that's more of a more recent discovery when throwing. That sort of stuff happens. If I'm just taking this angle here, I'll just push it, and you can already see it wants to get that up. So if you ever mess up on your pot, right, you can always reset your pot by using that sort of method. Like even when you've opened up your clay, you can reclose it by using that same method. And so I've done that a couple times for some of my students, and I think they're like, what? How'd you do that? And so it's kind of just knowing where to put your pressure on your clay. And again, right at this bottom, I'm cutting. I'm not pushing it. I'm using my finger as a knife to cut through that clay there. And it makes it almost perfectly even on that bottom every time. And then I can get rid of a lot of the inconsistencies of my centering using that method as well. And then here I'm going to do that claw grip pull. And again, I'm getting it to be like a sort of like a cone. And somewhere in the middle it seems a little bit off, right? That's okay, we'll fix that. And again, I'm going to do the English thing with my palm of my hand here. Great, look at that. Now I already got a lot of that clay up off that bottom, and I can go straight into like a pulling, right? And the first pull, it's so important. It's just, you want to get as much as that of the thickness. Right there, that's a problem spot, right? So I'm going to go extra slow. Oh, come on. Alright, this is not going to want to go, so let me just collar that up. And that's okay. I can see that you can see the wheel head, right? Not fully flat, so if I'm trying to put too much pressure on one of the sides, it's going to want to naturally pick up here. So now I'm just going to get as much as that sort of big chunk in that middle part that we hit, sort of equalize throughout that top, so then I can just go and do one normal pull there. And you can see I was drifting a little bit on that top finger. Compress that top edge. I just take my finger, hook it over. Now I can do just a normal pull. Let's start from this bottom. Nice and slow. You see I took a lot of that thickness out of that wall right there, and now it's really thin. You can see I got some wobble. If you don't want that wobble there, what would you do, right? Well, if you're trying to make like nice round pots, I would take my wooden rib, right? You can take a wooden rib and you just sort of smooth that out wherever you're getting some of that wobble, and you can cut that flat, right? Me, it doesn't really matter to me if it's wobbly or not, right? Does the form look good, right? Like, just because it's wobbly doesn't mean it's a bad form necessarily, right? And so I'm gonna open this up a little bit here. Getting a little bit wobbly right in this section. That's okay. We'll just pull that out. Look at that. Let's see what we're cooking with there. And sometimes what I'll do it on this one. I'll show you guys. I'm thinking that there's a lot of disparity of lines between my throwing lines, especially since I smoothed out that top. So you got one or two things you can do. A lot of people are just like, alright, well, I'm going to just dumb it down and just make it all super flat. Right, that's fine. Or you can set up shop right at the bottom here and then slow your wheel head down and just go enough to where you can create these nice even ridges, right? And now you have like these cool ridges to start with, right? And then you can make them a lot less drastic if you want, but now I've sort of eliminated that unevenness, right? I'm gonna go slow through here because now that we have these little ridges, you want to be able to follow them up through the pot here. And now it's totally collapsing. Sometimes we can do some crazy things. I'm gonna just stop right there. Right? And then like, look at what is going on. If you guys could see the interior right now, like, you got some crazy stuff. And so we're trying to just control this collapse, right? There's a potter, George Orr, who everybody always recommends to me. And like, nothing to George Orr, but I'm gonna take his spot one day. Just because I think he did the sort of collapsing stuff first, and so everybody relates stuff to him. But I guarantee you there's other potters who've done it in the past before him anyway, right? He's just the most notable one. But I mean, now we've created something that totally just doesn't even look like was birthed from the wheel, right? It looks like really organic, it looks sculptural, it looks like not like a normal pot, and that's what's the most exciting, right? And it's not like it's totally uneven, right? Like, that's like the key to making this style of work, is that, like, first I want it to look good, right? But I also don't want it to look like a mistake, right? And so I'm gonna just do like this. This is all potential. This is stuff that people cut off, right? But there's an inherent potential all up in this spot right there. I mean, now, again, we've taken stuff that gets cut off, the stuff that gets thrown away on the pot, and we've made something out of it, right? And so I think that's really what like throwing is. It's sort of like reacting, right? Like, how are you going to react if the clay starts to stop working the way you want it to, right? Or how are you going to react when there's an explosion in the kiln and you can't control that? How are you going to react when the glaze doesn't turn how you want it to? I think for me though, it's always like the most important is how am I going to react to the clay that's on the wheel in front of me, right? And I think it's training me very well to like respond to these a certain way, but I also think it's created and birthed its whole new sort of life of its own in pottery, right? Like, I mean, these are pretty simple, but there's a lot of things I can add to this to just like take them to like a whole new level. But yeah, all right, I'll be back in a second. Oh, here's that to get a closer look too. But I mean, look at the way that these are collapsing. They're pretty crazy, but there's an order to it too. So, all right, I'll be back in a second. All right, we got the last one. And again, I'm gonna be talking over it here. But yeah, like I mean, I see people, they spend their whole lives making things like in pottery that's like that they've seen before, right? And I've always thought, like, you know, pottery is a thing, but the conversation of what a form is, like, why are we just accepting what we see on like social media, on Instagram, underneath hashtag pottery? I mean, look at the stuff. I mean, a lot of it's pretty similar. A lot of people are doing like super high color, like mixing every glaze under the sun, right? And it's all about, in my mind, I read it as like excess, right? Where I think that if you want to have a conversation about excess, like getting a bunch of different glazes is not how you talk about excess in my mind, right? Like, I think they're right on the edge of where it feels like sort of like lazy, right? And I feel like I want at least in my mind, like pottery shouldn't feel like lazy, right? Like there's a very fine line between lazy and expressive. And you sort of want to find out like how to make your pottery feel believable or feel like professional. And me, it's not through like making the smooth, perfect, precise forms, because that's not how my mind works. My mind just is like 100 miles per hour, you know, all the time. And so what helps me out is, well, if it's 100 miles per hour all the time, then I'll just make a bunch of stuff. And that's how I'll have my sort of discussion with pottery, right? I'll have excess through complete like discipline on making, right? And then if people ever question my throwing ability, you know, just take a look at all my pots, right? There's a point where I think a mount, it gets so massive, you make so much things, that even if the people who make like one thing a year and they sell it for $1 bajillion and they make a living, you know, you start living in their mind as like this, like a little demon in their head, and they're thinking about like, wow, like the fact that somebody can sit there and just make so many, you know, things, right? You just sort of live in their brain. You know, they might have all the fame and fortune of it, right? But I think, like, at the end of life, it doesn't matter, you know? If at the end of my life, that's all I can say is I just made, like, 10 pots, and that was it. I don't know. To me, that just doesn't feel very fulfilling. I want to be able to, like, say, yeah, I filled up a couple, like, warehouses of pots. And I think there's like, true value somewhere in there, right? Also feeling the clay here, and I got a lot of weird bubbles. And so again, I'm going to do this. Sort of pull to get as much as that clay up. And I'm feeling all these bubbles in the clay right now. And the thing with bubbles is you don't get freaked out by the bubbles, right? Don't go like a little bit, don't change your pressure up just because you saw like a little bubble. You know, you gotta keep constant and consistent all the way through, right? If you stop halfway through your pole to sort of account for this weird bubble, right? Chances you're gonna like fix it are pretty zero, right? Unless it like magically pops. But it's way better to just finish off your pole so that you're not throwing the rest of your pot off, right? And I know I see people who are like, oh, I got air bubbles, like, oh, this pot's awash because I have air bubbles. And I just am thinking to myself, I'm like, well, you know, not exactly. It might be okay if you just have consistent pulls. It's the same with the rim on the top, right? Even though I'm having a bunch of problems here with this pot, as I'm feeling it here, I can still keep that top edge as long as I'm keeping that sort of S-curve as I'm pulling, right? It's not actually a pull, right? It's always sort of a stretch. And if you can stretch the clay rather than pull the clay, you're going to keep this top pretty even. Okay. Alright. I'm just one hand pulling this edge a little bit thinner. Just so then when I go to make the top, it's going to work a little bit with me rather than against me there. If it's too thick, you're going to rip the body, especially if your clay is short, right? And hopefully as I'm talking, you guys can see, like, my brain is like all over the place, right? Like it's never constant. I'm thinking like, oh, like the clay is a little bit short, so maybe I have to do this, right? It's always like I'm working with my what ifs, right? Like what if it collapses? How would I adjust, right? I'm always just sort of prepping myself for the worst disaster. So then I don't get like too stressed out if something goes wrong. I sort of have a game plan when this stuff is not working out. So here I messed up and I don't have a neat line. So I'm going to make a fake line there, right? I'm going to go exaggerate. Next time I come around, I'm going to exaggerate this spot, so then I can force that existing line, the one that I faked, back into it. When I say fake, what do I actually mean is I didn't have space, so my rhythm was off, right? And so to fix that, that's all I'm going to do is sort of go around the next time and then start the pull just a second sooner, so that I can make enough room for that other one to sort of be in there, and it's not like too far thrown off, right? And so I can bring it back in and reel it in. Alright, spider pull here, keeping pressure on all four edges there. Spreading my fingers as I'm doing that. Now I have like a nice twist. This one's pretty good too. You can see how there's only in a couple areas is it settling or nesting into itself. So I'm going to keep it like that. I'm just going to cut it off here, because not too often do I get ones like that, right? And I always imagine like if I was to glaze this pot, right, in these spots where it's just barely touching, oh my gosh, sometimes the glaze will fill that gap and then glaze is starting to change the form, right? Again, that's like another scenario of like a what if, right? And so I love to just give my pots as much what ifs potential as possible, right? That's why sometimes like maybe these will get flowers in them, like ceramic flowers. Maybe they'll change. I already have this idea that they'll all sort of be on almost like a plate the size of this, but it's thick. And so they'll have a base to sort of exist on, right? Calling back to the wheel a little bit, right? I think that'll be a cool way to display them once they get glazed. They won't be glazed for a while though. And this one, I'm looking at this one, I'm thinking that this one needs some more pizzazz on this bottom. Like the other one, I just did the normal twist. I think this one needs like the tendrils. So again, cut across. Speed it up, cut across, cut across. Cut across, cut across, cut across, cut across, and cut across. And these, like, the more even they are, it looks great, but sometimes you don't really need to make them perfectly even. right? As long as they're close. Like, I want it to look like it was made, you know? I don't want it to look like it was manufactured. Right? There's a huge difference between those two things. I always thought if I'm making work that could be manufactured, then like then I'm wasting my time. Right? I want to make stuff that looks made. But like made well. I should say that. Alright, and then the last little twist up here. And then if I'm looking at this, I actually quite like how this looks right here. So, I don't think I'll twist them in. So I'm going to keep them like this. And we'll see what it does. Maybe it'll be something cool later on, maybe not. Maybe glaze will fit in there really nice. We'll sort of figure that out once we get there. But yeah, that's the pot. Alright. Here we go. Alright. Thanks for watching. All the best. Strong mentality. Peace.